If you hear the phrase ghost town and picture a cowboy leaning against a saloon, Michigan would like a polite correction. Our ghost towns usually did not die in a gunfight. They died in meeting minutes, freight reports, and shutdown notices. Northern Michigan University's Beaumier Center puts it well. A Michigan ghost town might be almost gone, partly standing or just hanging on with a few holdouts left. In this state, the ghosts are often iron, copper, gypsum, pine, and the railroads that once swore they would always be needed. And that is what makes them so good for this End of the Road in Michigan episode. These places were often at the far end of something, a spur line, a dock, a furnace road, a company payroll, or a dream that looked solid until prices, methods, or transportation changed. Michigan ghost towns are less about tumbleweeds and more about a hard fact of regional history. Towns built for one narrow purpose can live fast and fade even faster. Take Fayette in the Upper Peninsula. It was built in 1867 by the Jackson Iron Company at a site chosen for clear reasons: a protected harbor, nearby limestone for flux, and forests that could be turned into charcoal for the furnaces. For a time, it worked. NMU says Fayette became one of the top charcoal iron producers in the Upper Peninsula and turned out about 200,000 tons over 23 years. Then the math changed. Fires hurt the operation, the nearby hardwood was cut over, and new methods made pig iron less desirable. By 1891, the industrial roar had largely gone quiet. Today, the state preserves Fayette, which is about the closest thing Michigan has to a ghost town with very good posture. Then there is Freda, west of Houghton on Lake Superior, where the Champion Copper Company built a mill town tied to the copper trade. Michigan Tech's Copper Range records say the Champion Copper Company was founded in 1899 and soon built a stamp mill in Freda. The town was named for Freda Payne, daughter of investor William Payne. The Copper Range Railroad reached the mills there by 1901, and for years Freda lived because ore kept arriving and stamped rock kept moving. When the mill closed in the late 1960s and the railroad rails were later removed, the town's reason for being was cut straight through the middle. That is a Michigan ghost town pattern in one sentence. No mill, no rail, no town. Alabaster, down on Lake Huron in Iosco County, has a different mineral but the same business logic. The area took its name from a fine variety of gypsum identified offshore by Douglas Houghton in 1837, and the quarry was opened in 1862 by B.F. Smith. The old Alabaster district grew into a major gypsum company town, with the quarry, processing works, rail movement, and a striking aerial dock carrying gypsum out over the water toward waiting ships. A Michigan historical marker notes that after a destructive fire in 1891, the works were rebuilt in time to provide material for the main buildings of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. If Fayette feels like iron and Freda feels like copper, Alabaster feels like industrial white dust, lake shipping, and a company town that slowly lost its center piece by piece. Now shift north again to Sigma in Kalkaska County, because Sigma is the sort of place that proves a ghost town did not have to be large to feel fully alive. Railroad history says Sigma was settled about 1910 on the Manistee and Northeastern's Grayling branch, about 10 miles southeast of Kalkaska. We found old photos that adds the human details that make the place breathe. A July 4th crowd scene, Murphy's soft drink parlor, a barber shop, gleaners in dress clothes, and an unusual cinder block depot. It turns out that this quirky detail is meaningful. A depot built to look sturdy says the railroad thought the stop mattered. The problem was that Sigma was built for logging and rail service first, ordinary town life second. When the branch weakened and moved toward abandonment in the mid-1920s, Sigma's future went with it. There is also a useful caution in the story of Michigamme Falls. We found one old image to an abandoned mining town area on the Michigamme River, north of Florence, and notes that the name today is more closely tied to the dam and reservoir after the original falls were altered by hydropower. But we also ask the honest question, do we know exactly where those buildings stood? That uncertainty is not a flaw. It is part of the story. Some ghost towns leave furnaces, some leave stacks, some leave a road grid, and some leave a photograph that says, in effect, something important was here, and now the paperwork is thinner than the pines. If the Upper Peninsula gives you the big industrial set pieces, the thumb gives you the quieter endings. Berne, in Huron County, was a small farming and railroad hamlet. In 1878, Berne was located in Windsor Township with a depot on the Pontiac-Oxford and Port Austin Railroad. The key blow came when another line crossed south of Berne. The Michigan History Trail marker for the Pigeon Depot says the railroad crossing became known as Berne Junction, and people moved there and established Pigeon in 1888. That is a brutal little sentence in local history. Berne did not need a disaster. It got outcompeted by geography and a better rail crossing 1 mile away. Michigan is full of stories like that. Linkville, also in Huron County, gives you a similar story in miniature. Local historians say Fayette began around 1870 as Kilkenny, got a post office in 1879, recovered after an early closure, and by 1893 was renamed Linkville after local settler Christian Link. At its peak, it had roughly 100 residents, a depot, a roller mill, a church, and a school. That is enough to feel like a town, even if it was never huge. Today, the Huron County Ghost Town page mostly marks its location on Kilmanor Road and notes the cemetery on Stein Road. Once there was a flour mill and a depot, now a cemetery does most of the talking. New River may be the thumb's best example of how complete a disappearance can be. Huron County's Ghost Town page says New River had a sawmill by 1853, a grist mill by 1856, and 2 salt wells by 1870, with product shipped to Detroit, Toledo, and St. Louis. An 1870 plat map showing streets on both sides of the river and a large dock reaching into Lake Huron, plus reports of heavy fishing and sturgeon in the creek. By 1900, references to the town were gone from the public record. What remains? Mostly the cemetery. That is not just decline. That is erasure with a burial ground left behind, as the footnote. Port Crescent deserves a seat near the front of Michigan's Ghost Town bus, partly because it has one of the best settings, and partly because it sounds like a place that should still be selling postcards and questionable fudge. The town grew near the mouth of the Pinnebog River, southwest of Port Austin, after Walter Hume opened a trading post and hotel in 1844. A sawmill followed in 1851, and soon Port Crescent was not a sleepy beach stop. It had steam-powered sawmills, salt works, a cooperage, grist mill, wagon shop, boot and shoe factory, breweries, hotels, blacksmiths, a school, a telegraph office, and enough activity to make a modern zoning board reach for aspirin. A 1,300-foot well-hit salt brine, and the town turned out thousands of barrels of salt a year by burning leftover lumber scraps to boil the brine. That is efficient, if not exactly subtle. At its peak, Port Crescent had more than 500 residents. Then the lumber ran out, the thumb fires damaged the timber economy, and an 1886 fire helped finish the job. Buildings were moved. The dock was dismantled. By the 1890s, the town had mostly packed up and left, which is one way to become a ghost town without waiting around to be haunted. Today, Port Crescent State Park sits on the site. Campers, hikers, and stargazers now walk over ground that once held mills, salt blocks, stores, and a busy Lake Huron port. It is hard to find a better Michigan ending than that. One town disappears, and a state park takes the view. But Michigan's ghost towns do not stop with furnace towns, rail stops, and company camps. Some of the best stories are the ones that sound as if a novelist made them up after one too many cups of gas station coffee. Start with Singapore, near Saugatuck and Douglas. Yes, Michigan had a Singapore. No, it did not come with skyscrapers, global finance, or airport efficiency. This one was founded in 1836 near the mouth of the Kalamazoo River by men who thought they had found the next great Lake Michigan port. For a while, they had a point. Singapore had sawmills, shipbuilding, stores, hotels, and a busy timber trade. Then came the cruel joke. The town cut the forest that protected it. After the 1871 fires in Chicago, Holland, Peshtigo, and Manistee, the demand for lumber soared. Singapore helped feed that demand. But with the trees gone, the sand came marching in. By the 1870s and early 1880s, the town was being swallowed by dunes. Michigan did not need a volcano to bury a town. Lake Michigan sand handled the job just fine. Farther north, inside Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore, Port Oneida tells a quieter story. It began as a lakeshore settlement tied to fishing, timber, and passing steamships. Karsten Burfiend, a German immigrant, became one of its early anchors. Thomas Kelderhouse built a dock by 1862, and the village grew around cordwood, logging, a sawmill, a store, a post office, and a small farm community. But by the 1890s, the timber trade was fading. Steamships moved from wood to coal. By 1908, the original town site was mostly abandoned. Port Oneida did not vanish under sand like Singapore. It shifted inland, became a farming district, then later became part of a preserved national park site. It is less haunted house and more abandoned chore list. Then there is Pere Cheney in Crawford County, which has become the state's overachiever in ghost town legend. It began in the 1870s as a lumber settlement tied to George Cheney, a sawmill and railroad traffic. It even had a brief role in early Crawford County government. But timber towns run on two clocks. One measures board feet. The other measures how long people can stay healthy, employed, and connected. Pere Cheney lost on all three. The post office closed in 1912. The village faded. The cemetery stayed. Then the stories came. Disease, curses, night visitors, and all the other things people add when the paper trail gets thin and the road gets dark. The best way to handle Pere Cheney is with one eyebrow raised. The lumber history is real. The cemetery is real. The ghost stories should be handled like hot pasties, carefully and with a little skepticism. Old Victoria in Ontonagon County offers a better-preserved mining town chapter. The Victoria Mine operated off and on from the mid-1800s until 1921. Its company village once had miners' homes, a school, a store, and the ordinary machinery of a working community. The mine had a technological twist, too. It used a hydraulic air compressor tied to water power from the Ontonagon River, giving it a cheaper power source than many competitors. But even clever engineering could not beat a falling copper market. When copper prices dropped after World War I, Victoria closed. The houses emptied. Later, preservation work saved several log cabins. Today, Old Victoria is one of those rare ghost towns where the story still has walls, doors, and rooms. Not far away in the western UP, Nonesuch may have the most honest name in the whole episode. The Nonesuch mine near the Porcupine Mountains had copper, but it had the wrong kind of copper for the tools and methods of the time. Fine copper trapped in sandstone sounds promising until the mill cannot separate enough of it to make money. The mine opened and closed several times between 1867 and 1912. For a few years, Nonesuch had a small community, a post office, a school, boarding houses, and even a baseball team. But the copper would not cooperate. Millions of pounds may have been sitting in the rock, but if you cannot profitably get it out, you do not have a mine. You have a very expensive geology lesson. And then there is Disco in Macomb County. Yes, Disco. It was platted in 1849 at what is now the area around 24 Mile and Van Dyke Roads in Shelby Township. The name came long before mirror balls, bell-bottoms, and somebody's uncle trying to dance at a wedding. Disco had stores, blacksmith shops, wagon shops, mills, a hotel, and a post office. It also had the Disco Academy, which sounds like either a serious frontier school or the best name ever wasted on a 19th century classroom. The post office closed in 1906. The village never incorporated. Today, only old maps, a few traces, and a very good name remain. Sleeping Bear adds still more towns to the ledger. Aral, near Otter Creek, became a lumber town in the 1880s, with a sawmill, workers, a store, and about 200 people at its peak. When the timber ran out and the mill closed in 1911, the town's future went with it. Edgewater, near Platte Lake, used a small railroad to move lumber to Lake Michigan. When the mill shut down around 1900, the buildings were taken apart and reused, which is one reason so many ghost towns leave almost nothing behind. Good Harbor, north of Glen Arbor, was another lumber and dock village. Its mills shipped wood products and farm goods, but when the business moved on, the town faded to pilings and memory. Glen Haven is the polished cousin in this crowd. It began as a company town and wooding stop for steamships, then shifted toward lumber, canning, tourism, and maritime service. Today, it is preserved inside Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore with buildings that let visitors see what a small Lake Michigan port once looked like. Glen Haven is a ghost town with a maintenance plan. Central Mine and Clifton give the Keweenaw its own strong finish. Clifton grew around the Cliff Mine, one of the early stars of Michigan copper mining. When the ore body lost its value, Clifton lost its reason to exist. Central Mine was more durable. Its copper operation began in the 1850s, and the village grew around the mine. At its peak, Central had homes, churches, and a strong Cornish mining presence. The mine closed in 1898. The last permanent resident left in the 1950s. Today, the Central Mine Methodist Church and remaining buildings stand as a spare reminder that a company town could feel permanent right up until the company stopped writing checks. And that really is the punchline to Michigan's ghost towns, if a ghost town is allowed to have a punchline. They did not all die in dramatic fashion. Some did, after fire or industrial collapse. But many simply lost one support at a time. First, the rail line stopped running, then the post office closed, then the mill shut down, then the store no longer penciled out, then the school folded into another district, then the church stood alone until it was moved elsewhere. Then even that became a historical marker or a memory told by someone's grandfather at the kitchen table. The real haunting is administrative. So if you go looking for Michigan ghost towns, do not only look for ruins, look for what replaced them. A state park at Fayette, a quiet roadside at Freda, an industrial district and faded village identity at Alabaster, a depot story in Sigma, a junction that stole Berne's future, a cemetery where Linkville used to make flour and collect mail, a patch of ground near New River where the business district lost its fight with time, or Port Crescent, whose shifting sands now are a wonderful state park. In Michigan, the end of the road is often not a cliff. It is a shrug, a signboard, and a place where a town used to have a reason to wake up every morning. And maybe that is why these places stick with us. They are not empty because nobody cared. They are empty because Michigan kept moving to the next ore body, the next stand of timber, the next rail crossing, the next factory method, the next town that made better business sense. Ghost towns are what the map looks like after progress has edited the rough draft. And if you listen closely at the end of those roads, what you hear is not a moan. It is the faint sound of a depot clock, a mill whistle, a shovel in white gypsum dust, and one last station agent trying to help unload the freight before daylight.